Good evening, comrade. Amandla. Amandla.
Wait.
Comrades, we are about to commence the class. We have our resource person.
1 hour time.
We have our resource person seated, and we are about to start the class, just as I said. Okay, this is Socialist Forum of Ghana. We are about to commemorate the birth of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And this lecture is particularly to tell participants of the enormous contributions Osagyefo did in the struggle and to help Ghana attain independence. The theme for this class is the struggle for Ghana's independence, the role of Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. And our speaker is Justice Akuffo-Henaku of the Socialist Forum of Ghana, who is also a historian. Now, this is going to be the modalities for the class. He is going to lead a discussion for 1 hour. After 1 hour, we will allow for questions for 30 minutes. And then it will be an interaction. That is, it's going to be a 1 hour of interaction. We are assuming that it's going to be 30 minutes of questions and 30 minutes of answering sessions. And it will be regulated as such. In case you have any other contribution or any other question that you want to ask, beneath the screen, beneath your screen, there is a tab called Chat. Click in the chat session and then write your question or your contribution there. It will be attended to. We will hope you enjoy the class. If it gets to the time for us to ask questions, all you have to do is raise up your hand. You'll be identified, and then your question will be listened to, and then subsequently, Comrade Henaku will answer your question. Thank you so much and enjoy your class. Thanks so much. Amandla.
Amandla. Socialism up. Imperialism abash. Today, we're going to have a talk, an engagement. I like it to be an engagement from myself and yourself on a bit of the political history of Ghana, touching on the national liberation struggle, not only in Ghana, but in the whole of Africa, as well as in other parts of Africa. and the role which was played by the Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who gave his life, his thoughts, his deeds, everything that he had for the liberation of his fellow human being. He was a humanist, above all a socialist, who believed in the sanctity of life, the freedoms, and the justice for all. We are going to talk about the struggle for national liberation, and the role of Kwame Nkrumah. The time period will be indeed from 1947 to post 1960. But before I really start from 1947, I'll go a bit or have a small excursion into the history of the territory called the Gold Coast, which has now become the modern state of Ghana. The European explorers came to the shores of the territory of what's now modern Ghana in 1471. Portuguese by name Diego de Azambuja, they were looking for a route to India because the Middle East and Eastern Europe had largely been occupied by the Turks, the Ottomans. And so access to precious minerals as well as silk, grains, etc., from the Far East and China was restricted. And Europe was forced to look for an alternative route to India so that it could trade with India and the Far East. And they happened, one of the places they landed their ships at was a coastal town called Edna, which later on became Elmina, which in Portuguese means the mine, because they discovered fabulous loads of gold from that place and started trading with the indigenous people there. Within about 10 years, around 1482, they had forced to build a huge castle over there. I'm sure those of you who have been to Elmina have seen those castles. And they also began to trade in slavery. And indeed, we all know that the Pope had divided the world into two between Spain and Portugal. And a Spanish priest called Las Casas in Cuba, after they had conquered, the conquistadors had conquered the New World in the Americas. They overused the Indians in mining for silver, which the Europeans needed for their currency. And they also introduced new types of diseases into the Americas. And indeed, it killed off the Indians in a genocidal manner. A lot of them died. And so they needed labor. And they resorted to getting labor from Africa. And indeed, for 400 or so years, we lost some of the brightest, the fiscally strong, and intellectually highly minded people, the youth of our continent, in the slave trade. They didn't like old men or old women. They liked people who they could use physically and people they could use intellectually. So it is akin to the modern human trafficking, which crosses the Mediterranean to Europe, where we invest to teach our youth, and then they die in the trans-Saharan trek, and they die along in the Mediterranean. They drown in the Mediterranean on their way for economic opportunities in Europe. Colonialism indeed started in our part of the world, that is in the Gold Coast, formally around 1879. 1849. Indeed, in 1850, they tried to collect poll tax from some of the coastal towns without, of course, providing anything. I mean, the natives were not represented in anything, but they were being taxed. Indeed, it was a tribute of a sort. And the people of La in Accra resisted fiercely. And the British bombarded those towns and called them bad people. That's why we had Labadi instead of La. And it is now rightfully called La. They bombarded Nungwa, they bombarded Teshin, Osu, Cape Coast, etc., because they all refused to pay the poll tax in 1850. But after the Anglo-Ashanti War of 1871, when the British were victorious, they started actively putting up the colonial structures. Indeed, within 1873, there was resistance. There was resistance from the Fanti Confederation. We said, no, we are sovereign people. We can also unite and bring about modern development in our city-states. But the British arrested the leaders of the Fanti Confederation who wanted to bring about development, etc. Indeed, it was through the work of the Fanti Confederation that this famous secondary school, called Infantsipim, was founded around the 1890s, and it has been a leading secondary school in our part of the world for a very long time till date. By 1900, the British had managed to conquer their fiercest foe, which is Asante, and then took over the Northern Territories and took over and created the Gold Coast by 1901, 1902. Indeed, by 1918, when the Germans lost the war, the Germans indeed have been occupying a part of modern Ghana now called the Transvaal Togoland. And because they lost the war, all their territories, that is in Togoland, Cameroon, Namibia, Tanganyika, Burundi, Rwanda, and New Caledonia in the Pacific, were taken over and shared between the victorious powers of Britain and France, who placed these territories nominally under the League of Nations, an international organization created after the First World War to keep order in the international world at that time. Togoland was divided, and part of Togoland, which is the Transvaal Togoland, was administered by the British. The rest of Togoland was administered by the French. It was the same they did for Cameroon, where Southern Cameroon was administered by the British in conjunction with Nigeria, and then the rest of Cameroon was administered by the French, for that matter. So I gave you this brief history to be able for us to picture what the Gold Coast was and how the Gold Coast originated to become the colonial possession of Great Britain, an imperialist power whose only aim of acquiring territories after shipping off our people for 400 years, whose aim of acquiring territories was to create a closed market where they could assure themselves of cheap raw materials, and then they could sell their consumer items without allowing any other European power to come and compete with them in that market. That is what actually colonialism was all about. And then, of course, reduce the inhabitants, the indigenous people, as being subservient and serving the colonial people. The surplus value is taken off. There's actually no development except for a few infrastructural development which facilitates the shipping out of the raw materials, like having a harbor in Takrady, creating a school which will produce clerical officers to facilitate their indirect rule, etc., etc. Osajefo was born in 1909 in a small village called Nkrumah in the western part of the Gold Coast. I've already told you that the Gold Coast as a whole was divided into 4 component parts. We have the Gold Coast colony, which stretched from the western region, Elubo, right up to Aflao in the now southern part of the Volta region. Then the second component part of the Gold Coast was Asante, which was the ancient kingdom of Ashanti, which was military conquered in 1901. The third component part was the Northern Territories, where the British signed agreements with them because they were under attack by outside forces who were still engaged in the slave trade. Because when the British stopped the slave trade for economic reasons to help in their industrialization, the United States of America was still engaged in the slave trade. And the slavery was actually abolished only in the 1890s in Brazil and elsewhere. So slaves were being taken through Dahomey and shipped out. And there were raids especially in the northern territories for that. So they signed agreements because the British wanted to acquire those lands, and they turned those lands into crown lands. I mean, lands belonging to the crown in England. Again, Sergeant Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was born in this kind of environment. He grew up, he went to school, he attended a famous Achimota school, he became a teacher, and went to the United States of America to further his studies in the special Negro University of Lincoln, the Lincoln University in England, of course, where in the United States. Of course, when he was there, the ferment for Black power consciousness, the ferment for civil rights was at its height in the United States of America. Because in the United States of America, after the abolition of slavery, Jim Crow laws were invented, lynching of Black people, discrimination, economic exclusion was practiced among the Black people. And the Black people in America reacted, they fought back. And Nkrumah was part of these Black organizations which fought back. We also had one of the famous Pan-Africanists, Dr. Du Bois of the United States, having started the Pan-Africanist Congress in 1900 in London. The first one was held in London, and subsequent ones were held. And when Osajefo finished school in the United States, he came to England to continue school, to acquire a law degree and continue his other studies. There too, he was also engaged in the civil rights movement in England and the anti-colonial struggle. And he became the co-secretary of the 5th Pan-African Congress, which was organized by him, Dr. Du Bois, George Padmore, and others. They brought together future African leaders like Jomo Kenyatta, Leopold Senghor, Kamuzu Banda of Malawi, Nyerere, and others to London to attend this all-important 5th Pan-African Congress. And of course, the aim which and objectives which they put in front of them was the total liberation of the African continent from colonialism. So before he even came to Ghana, he has started an internationalist cause, a Pan-Africanist cause, to free his people from the bondage of imperialism and the bondage of colonialism. They decided that he had to come to the Gold Coast when he was invited to the Gold Coast to help organize the first indigenous movement, which was demanding self-government in the shortest possible time. That was a movement of the elite. The elite wanted more room to maneuver. Let us remember that the British, because they wanted a cheap colonial administration, had invented a system of governance in the colonies called indirect rule. And under the indirect rule, they used the chiefs. And the chiefs had largely been discredited for failing to defend their people and for engaging in the slave trade. They decided to use the chiefs and the educated elite to rule through them the indigenous people of the colonies. They did same in Nigeria, they did same in Sierra Leone, they did same in the Gambia and elsewhere. Where there were no chiefs, like in Igbo land, they created chiefs, or in northern territories of Ghana, they created chiefs for that purpose. So Kwame Nkrumah was invited to be the General Secretary or the Secretary General of the United Gold Coast Convention. The United Gold Coast Convention was founded on the 4th of August, 1947. By the time Nkrumah was invited, when he arrived in December of 1947, there were only 3 branches of the United Gold Coast Convention. And they were located in Accra, in Jamestown, in Salt Pond, in Central Region, and in Sekondi, in the Western Region, within the Gold Coast colony. Indeed, there were people who were the members of the United Gold Coast Convention were all from the Gold Coast colony. There was none from Ashanti and none from the Northern Territories. It was a restricted club of the Southern elite from the Gold Coast colony. When Nkrumah came in December 1947, he set out to do his task. He immediately, within 6 months, visited these 4 territories which now make up modern Ghana, opening branches wherever he went. He indeed opened 500 branches of the United Gold Coast Convention in that colony, in the Transvolta Togoland, in Asante, and in the Northern Territories. He disregarded the fact that these were 4 different parts. He believed that these 4 different parts must be made to come together, be united into a modern nation, which later on will be called Ghana. He also started reaching out to various organizations, especially amongst the working class people, the trade unions, the veterans associations, the nurses associations, the railway engine men association, amongst readers club, literary clubs, etc., etc. He reached amongst them in order to organize them and organize a branch of the party with the motto, self-government now, that we can't afford for foreigners to rule us, and that the foreigners must go back to where they came from, and we should be allowed to manage or mismanage our own affairs. It is our sovereign will to rule ourselves. And this liberation struggle he waged not only in the territory of the Gold Coast, but far afield across Africa to the Caribbean and elsewhere. He indeed continued with the traditions of the liberation struggle which started in Haiti in 1801 by Toussaint Louverture and others who didn't see why the Black people should be slaves and be serving France, and so revolted and created the first Black Republic in the Western Hemisphere. He, Dosajefo, followed in the trail of these great men who trailed the blaze of freedom for the African. He had problems in the UGCC because the pace at which he was going was too radical for educated elites. They didn't really want independence. They wanted simply a life of comfort within the colonial system. And they were not happy that Kwame Nkrumah was upsetting the apple cart. Kwame Nkrumah organized amongst the Veterans Association. And you know, after the Second World War, Britain was down economically. Through that, great countries like India, Pakistan, Burma, and others were able to gain their independence, led by the great Nehru, using non-violent means. They were able to gain independence for India, which was a jewel in the crown for the British colonialists. And Kwame Nkrumah learned those tactics of non-violence resistance to the colonial authorities. In addition to that, he organized the Veterans Association, who, amidst the economic downturn and the economic hardships of the people, who went on a demonstration to present a petition to the governor, and they were shot in cold blood. 3 of them were killed at the gates of Government House in Christiansborg by the British police who were there and who gunned down these unarmed people because they wanted to just present a petition to the governor. Why did they want to give a petition to the governor? Because the pensions they were promised for fighting for the British people in Burma, in WAC, in elsewhere, India, against the Japanese and against the Italians, were not honored. The British didn't honor them. They didn't pay their pensions to them. They didn't settle them. They just cheated them, which is a characteristic of colonialism and imperialism. And these people wanted their rights to be restored. And they went going to give a peaceful march, going to give a petition, and they were gunned down in cold blood. And this sparked weeks of uprisings in our country, a country which was supposed to be a model country, a country which since 1879 had been pacified by the British, who had imposed their will on them, erupted. And the British had to bring in troops from the West Indies and from England to try to maintain law and order. They had to impose a curfew in order to make sure that they wouldn't be thrown out of our country. Kwame Nkrumah was arrested. It wasn't only Kwame Nkrumah. The other leaders within the United Gold Coast Convention were arrested. 5 of them plus Kwame Nkrumah, 6 of them. They were sent to different parts of the country. They were brought before a commission of inquiry called the Kusi Commission. And what happened? All the 5 denounced Kwame Nkrumah and said they didn't know anything about the ex-servicemen's march to present a petition, and that Kwame Nkrumah was a communist. He was a member of a group called the Circle, and he was out to come and subvert the whole law and order which the colonial system had imposed. They gave up Kwame Nkrumah. But to their surprise, and to the surprise of their British masters, Kwame Nkrumah said, yes, he takes full responsibility for everything, and that he demands that the British hand over power to the people, to the indigenous people, and go back to their country. He was not going to praise the British for ruling, stealing, and suppressing us. He wanted them out, and he wanted independence now. The others were released. Later on, Kwame Nkrumah had to be released, and Kwame Nkrumah started using his newspaper called the Evening News to be able to inform, to be able to educate, to be able to agitate and organize the people. One different characteristic of Kwame Nkrumah's abilities, political abilities when he came to Ghana, was that he put the ordinary people, the ordinary Ghanaian, into the center of organization. He didn't just go and sit at some desk and propound theories or dreams, drinking tea like the elite were doing. He went down, he visited villages, he visited the people, he sat with them, he slept in their hearts, he ate their food with them. I mean, however miserly the food was, he spoke with them, he discussed with them how they could improve their lives. He was able to explain to them that the life they were leading was in the poverty that they had was connected to the fact that most of the wealth which were in the DS in their country was being shipped out to serve the colonial masters. And that if they wanted to improve their lives, they wanted good drinking water, they wanted electricity, they wanted education. If they wanted their children to be able to go to university, have good roads, have factories, etc., etc.
We know we are always supposed to prepare for war, but this one, I think we weren't prepared. We were caught off guard. But he who fights back is prepared to win. So we are back to continue the class. The modalities we spelled out for this class still holds. If you have any question, you can type it in the chat session that is beneath your screen. We will look at it and answer you. Now, when you try coming in and there is a difficulty, don't worry, we will admit you into the class because we needed to put a passcode, but unfortunately, these people without scruple came in and they disturbed everything. So on we march. Amandla.
Yeah, thank you for your patience. Indeed, that is what the struggle is about, to overcome all obstacles which are put in one's way. Once you know that your cause is just, you fight on in order to achieve your objectives. Indeed, 1949, I said, was marked a watershed year. That was when Osajifo broke away from the UGCC. He was indeed sacked as the Secretary General of the United Gold Coast Convention, and he was made treasurer. But when Nkrumah was organizing, he had also organized a youth wing of the United Gold Coast Convention called the Committee for Youth Organization. Indeed, he had brought together most of the youth organizations in the Gold Coast into the Committee for Youth Organization. And the firebrands in that Committee for Youth Organization demanded that Kwame Nkrumah resign from the United Gold Coast Convention and lead them. He indeed was forced to even sign his resignation letter on the back of one of the stalwarts of our independence struggle called Jenklejewu. And it was gallant people like Comrades Kofi Bakun and others who were there to support the Osajifo, Comrade Butsu and others. All these men, Komla Bedema and others, all these gallant people supported the Osajifo in his breakaway from the UGCC and the formation of the Convention People's Party. Again, when Osajifo was organizing, he paid particular attention to women because women were under double oppression. They were being oppressed internally by a patriarchal system in our country, as well as being oppressed by the foreigners, because most of our women, if they were not farmers, then they were traders. As farmers, they got very little for their produce. Indeed, in 1939, the cocoa farmers in our country had to burn their cocoa instead of selling them to Cadbury and Fry, to UHC, GB Olivan, who were paying very little prices for the cocoa. And our women were cocoa farmers. So they were doubling under that kind of oppression. And again, our women were traders, petty traders in the market. And they were trading European goods, which were the ones allowed, manufactured goods, which were that consumer goods, which were allowed into our country. And the wholesalers, the wholesaling was controlled by the Syrians, by the Greeks, by the Lebanese and others. And they were also oppressing them by charging them high prices to sell their goods. So their profit margin was almost next to nothing. And Osagyefo brought these women into the struggle, and they became the bedrock. I might say that the bankrolling, the financing of the Convention People's Party was made possible by great women like Sam Akushika, a stalwart of the CPP and a market trader. They collected money from amongst them and gave it to the party to finance the party. The youth were also a vanguard of the new Convention People's Party, which was created on 12th of June 1949. And they had the energy, they had the understanding, they were adventurous. So they couldn't play a back role to the struggle for national independence. They took part. Of course, nobody is saying that the elite didn't somewhat contribute, but they were laid back. They were satisfied mainly with the status quo. They wanted just some minor improvements in their status, and that is all. So the character of the liberation struggle, for the struggle for independence in our country, assumed almost national proportions, with most or almost all sections of the country, of the nation, taking part in one form or the other. The chiefs were not happy, but there were some chiefs who broke ranks. The Sikado Hene, Nana Kobdan Ketia, and others, they were at the forefront of helping the independence struggle. The working people. Indeed, in 1950, 8th of January, when positive action was declared, the main nexus of that action was by the working people. The railways came to a halt. The post office came to a halt. No telegrams were sent. No letters were sent. The truckers refused to work. They went on strike. There were demonstrations, etc. Again, the British had to declare a state of emergency in our country. And Kwame Nkrumah was arrested for sedition. That's what they call it, and jailed for 2 years. But because he had organized with his lieutenants, with the likes of Kofi Bakon, with the likes of Kojopo Tio, Jenkli Chewu, and others, KSP Jantwa, and other firebrands from Ashanti and elsewhere, J. Ibrahima, LR Abavana, and others from the Northern Territory, there was a clear leadership in place when Kwame Nkrumah was taken out of the scene and jailed in Usher Fort in Jamestown in Accra. He continued to help organize by writing directives from his prison cells through a very friendly jailer or warden who smuggled toilet papers, extra toilet papers to him, and he wrote his instructions on those toilet papers, which were smuggled out of Jamestown, Usher Fort prisons to his lieutenants to continue on the fight. So when the British decided that with the crisis at hand, the internal self-government had to be given, and that elections were to be called to an all-African legislative council, something they had been resisting since 1901. They thought Kwame Nkrumah was out, but Kwame Nkrumah managed to register. His people registered him, and in 1951, in the elections, the CPP demanded that there should be universal adult suffrage. Yes, it was only adults aged 21 and above who could vote, but unlike earlier on in England, where only men could vote, and the suffragists had to fight to get the right to vote, here, because of the demand for the universal adult suffrage, both men and women were allowed to take part in the vote in 1951. And the CPP won overwhelmingly. They won 32 out of 34 seats. 2 seats were won by the opposition. The United Gold Coast Convention did not win any seat, and it got disbanded almost immediately after. Kwame Nkrumah stood for elections in Accra Central, which indicated or which symbolized the fact that he thought of himself as a Ghanaian, as a Gold Coaster, rather than as somebody from Nkrumah in the Western region. And the people proved him right. The people overwhelmingly, with 95% of the votes, gave it to Osajifo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, and he beat his opponents, Obechebi Lante, who was a native of Accra Central, and Dr. Nanka Bruce, who was also a native of Accra Central. He got 95%. They had to share 5% among the two natives. Unfortunately, Dr. J.B. Dankwa, a leading member of the United Gold Coast Convention, who stood for election in his hometown of Chebi, lost to his cousin Erono Furiata, who was a member of the CPP. The British, as usual, were mean. Instead of calling Dr. Nkrumah the Prime Minister, like they did in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and elsewhere, where internal self-government was given to earlier on, before independence, they still chose to call him leader of government business. It was later on in 1952 that they were forced to accept the fact that Nkrumah was the Prime Minister of the Gold Coast. When Nkrumah came to power with an African cabinet, his African cabinet reflected his belief in national unity and of a Ghanaian entity. And so indeed, ministers came from the west, from the central, from the east, from Transvolta Togoland, which was even yet to be legally part of the Gold Coast, as well as from the Ashanti and Northern territories. That was the kind of ministers he created, ministerial committee that or cabinet that he created. He also, for the first time, drew up a budget for the Gold Coast. Hitherto, our budget was part of the colonial budget. So we're just a small part of that whole vast enterprise called the colonies. But we had our own budget from then on. He then took over the Cocoa Marketing Board and put a tax on cocoa exports so that the money accruing will be used for an accelerated development of our country. This later on became a problem in 1954 when certain elements of the elite in Ashanti thought that, oh no, the cocoa belonged to us, so why should the proceeds from cocoa be used to develop the country? But then the counter argument was that, yes, indeed, the cocoa farms might belong to the Asantis, the Achims, the Ekweapims, the Gans, and indeed it was the Gans and the Ekweapims who started the investment in cocoa anyway. But who were the ones who are the laborers, who worked on the farms, who were the tenant farmers, who tilled and cultivated cocoa? They were from the north. They were from Transvolta Togoland and elsewhere. So they were also part of the revenues cocoa generated, because without their labor, cocoa couldn't have been cultivated for it to be generating revenue. And in any case, we're also getting revenue from gold. Who were most of the labor in the gold mines? It was people from the north. Yes, it was true. The Northern Territories was like a reserved labor force for the colonialists. They closed it. For you to move from the north to the south in search of job, you must get a special pass. But then they contributed to nation building. And that was the kind of national unity that Nkrumah stood for. He stood for a unified country. He stood for the unification of the Northern Territories, of Asante, of the Gold Coast colony. And in 1956, they campaigned vigorously for the Transvolta Togoland to vote in a referendum supervised by the United Nations for them to be part of the Gold Coast. And one of the first infrastructural projects that he embarked upon when in the first 5-year development plan in the 50s was the Adome Bridge to connect the two halves of the Gold Coast and Transvolta Togoland. He also subsequently built the Tefle Bridge in Sukakope to connect the two. This is a symbol of somebody who wanted a united Ghana. And at this particular time, that unity is an imperative. We can't afford to be balkanized. We can't afford disunity. We need to be a united entity. And Nkrumah started it from way back at that time as one of his projects, as one of the projects of independent Ghana. The 5-year accelerated development plan was intended to make sure that there was huge investment made in education. Indeed, in the north, there were only about 1 or 2 middle schools in Yendi and elsewhere. So we needed the colony, the Gold Coast needed to catch up. It needed to bring up education so that within the next generation, we'll have a generation of teachers, carpenters, composers, cultural workers, engineers, etc., to help develop our country. So there was a huge investment in education, and they started building secondary schools as well. The University of Ghana, Legon, had been started in Achimota with a campus in Achimota by the colonial government after pressure from the indigenous people led by Dr. Dankwa and others. But nevertheless, Kwame Nkrumah built the first campus of the University of Ghana in Legon. And when you go to Legon, you see how beautiful the campus is. It was started by the Osajefo, and he started at Kumasi School of Technology, which later on became Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. So right from the primary school up to tertiary, there was huge investment. There was investment, like I said, in infrastructure, in bridges, in roads, in the telecoms, post office, etc. Post offices were open all over to aid in communication, etc., etc. But most important of all, the fiscal policies of Nkrumah was such that we started saving money. It was that money that we saved that British colonial propagandists and anti-Nkrumahs tried to say that the British left us money. The $500 million or 250 million pounds for that matter was saved by us. It was taxes on our gold, it was taxes on our cocoa, other taxes, which fiscal policies Nkrumah had in the first 5-year development plan, which resulted in the savings of that money. He only saved that money by buying securities in Britain and after in our independence, we called for that money because there was a need to invest in other infrastructure and the development of our country. But back to the political scene. A second election was called in 1954 because there were problems, there were some disturbances in our country because of the tax on cocoa and the agitation by the elite in Ashanti and elsewhere against it, saying that their money was for them. A political party was created which was sectarian-based, called the National Liberation Movement, and which was actually from the Asante Scots and led by Balfour Saikoto. And they demanded an independent entity for themselves instead of a united Ghana, or at best they will agree only to a federal form of government, a federal system of government. It wasn't only in Asante that those forces of disunity were actively working. In Accra, our capital, a group led by Atokwashi and Obeche Bilante called variously Accra Stand Fast, Gan Shiponkwe, that's Gan Land for Gans, etc., etc., formed and wanted independence for Accra. They indeed had a vigilante group called the Tokyo Joes, who were armed with blades and other sharp implements. And when they ask you where you came from, if you say you are a Fanti, they will say Afante Koyo. If you say you are Ewe, they will say Aigbe Koyo. Or go back to where you came from, and they will mutilate you because you are not a Ga. This happened in our country. The NLM had a vigilante group called the Action Troopers. They turned Kumasi into a war zone, killing all the CPP, most CPP activists. Most of the CPP activists had to run away to come and live in Accra. They even ended up beheading the sister of one of Kwame Nkrumah's topmost lieutenants, Krobedu Sey. The lady was cooking for her children, and these vigilante groups entered her house and murdered her in cold blood. Indeed, Ashanti became a no-go area. But the CPP people also countered, and they also formed their vigilante group called the Action Groupers. And I must say that in the 1950s, in the independence struggle, the internal strife, brother against brother, sister against sister, father against children, was quite intense. A lot of people got killed. There's a certain myth that our independence was achieved peacefully because we tried to cover up this kind of heinous evil which was perpetrated by brother against brother by the political parties. Another group called the Northern People's Party, led by Mumuni Bawumia and others, was also formed in the Northern Territories. And they also wanted independence for the Northern Territories. And in the Transvolta Togoland, a movement called Tolimo, or Togoland Liberation Movement, was created to fight for unification with Togoland, which, when the plebiscite of 1956 denied them, there was an armed uprising from Alavanyo. They were only put down by the Gold Coast Regiment in Frankedria near Akosombo when they were marching down to secure their borders. There was yet other groups, other sectarian groups, and these sectarian groups also included the Aulon Youth Association in the southern part of the Volta region, which was part of the Gold Coast colony, and then the Muslim Association Party, which was a religious sectarian group based in the Zungos, and which admitted only people of Islamic faith to be members of that party. The economic development I was talking of under the 5-year development plan also built health clinics, like Akuffo-Henaku Hospital was built in the 1950s. The greatest project in the 1950s of infrastructure which was built was the Tama Harbour, which was a modern harbour on the Atlantic. The only other modern harbour compared to it was in Cape Town in South Africa. And Tema Township was also built. Social housing or mass housing to provide houses for the people was also created in Awudome and other places for workers to be able to get houses. The State Housing Corporation was formed to provide those social housings. It was akin to the council housing, which was provided by the Labour government in England. That time, the post of external affairs or the foreign ministry, justice, and to a certain extent finance was controlled by the British. Nevertheless, in 1955, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah traveled to Indonesia, to a town called Bandung, met with Prime Minister Nehru of India. He also met with President Tito of Yugoslavia and Sukarno of Indonesia to initiate and start, and of course, and others, to start, initiate and start the non-aligned movement, a movement which grouped all countries who did not want to belong to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, or belong to the Warsaw Pact, but who wanted to be free and neutral of military blocs and be left alone to practice whatever kind of system they wanted. So when we talk of the non-aligned movement, Dr. Nkrumah was a founding member of the non-aligned movement, which was a worldwide organization. Dr. Nkrumah, like I indicated, was a Pan-Africanist from the core, and he was actually sent by the Fifth Pan-African Congress to start the liberation struggle in the Gold Coast for Africa. Yeah, for Africa. And so when he came, he visited, the first place he visited was the United States of America, to go to his alma mater to be given a doctorate, an honorary doctorate degree. The other places he visited included Liberia, which had become independent since 1848, and whose president was President Topman. Liberia, you know, had settlers from the United States who created that country. And apart from Ethiopia, were the only two independent countries on the African continent for a very, very long time. Nkrumah also extended, paid attention indeed to the liberation struggle elsewhere. And great men like Kamuzu Banda of Malawi came to Ghana or to the Gold Coast to practice as a medical doctor in Kumasi. Others also came to settle in Ghana. Later on, Robert Mugabe and others will come and become teachers in Ghana and work towards liberating their countries. After independence, in 1958, Guinea voted to be independent outside the French community, and the French punished them severely. The bombs, the desks, the pencils, anything which came in hand was taken away back to Paris. And indeed, things which could not be taken were destroyed. All the monies were taken out, despite the huge bauxite revenues which the French were collecting. And Nkrumah had to extend a helping hand. Nkrumah in Ghana had to extend a helping hand by giving them a loan of 10 million pounds to tidy them up whilst they found their feet. But before we get further after independence of 1957, let's talk about the fourth puzzle on the jigsaw puzzle of our country. The first one I told you was the Gold Coast colony, which stretched from Elubo to Aflao. The second puzzle was Asante. The third was Northern Territories. The fourth, like I told you, was Transvolta Togoland, which had belonged or which was dominated or colonized by the Germans, and which had been taken over by the British and the French and divided amongst them. And the British had administered Transvolta Togoland as part of the Gold Coast. In 1956, the United Nations came down to Transvolta Togoland to come and conduct a referendum or a plebiscite under international supervision, which they did. Those who campaigned for reunification with Ghana included the Convention People's Party. Those who campaigned against reunification was the Togo Land Liberation Movement, or Tolimo, which was also backed by the other groups from the Gold Coast who wanted independence for their various territories. The pro-unificationists won overwhelmingly, and Transvolta Togoland actually stretched not from Aflao, because Aflao, like I indicated to you, was part of the Gold Coast colony, stretched from north of Djodje right up to Boko. Half of Yendi was part of that territory, including now Uti region, parts of northern region, northeast region, parts of northeast region, and part of upper east region of our country called Ghana. They took part in the referendum or plebiscite, and they wanted to be united with the Gold Coast colony in order to be able to enjoy independence a year later on the 6th of March, 1957. And on the eve of 6th of March, 1957, the Sajefo stood at the old polo grounds, now the site of the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum, and declared that Ghana was free forever. He also declared in a landmark quote that the independence of Ghana was meaningless unless it was linked with the total liberation of Africa. Nkrumah really felt that independence was indivisible. You couldn't have a small pocket of Africa which was independent, and there were others which were under the clutches of imperialism and colonialism, because they would subvert the new independent country. And so it was an imperative that he rather subverted the colonial possessions for them to gain independence in order to achieve the ultimate aim of Pan-African unity. Because it was only in unity that we could trade, we could develop, and we could live in peace. With a balkanized state, 54 African countries, we are always weak, and we don't have control over our natural resources. We are doomed to subsist on the consumers' items from the West, and for us to hand over our natural resources like it is happening now. Now we just don't hand over the right for them to take to mine our natural resources. Now we are even giving the proprietary rights of the natural resources, which are underground, to them. We are now even allowing foreigners to come into our gold fields to replace our artisanal gold miners. Even our ancestors didn't allow the Europeans to get to the gold fields. The first gold field of Obuasi, and Takwa, which the white man saw, was way back in the 1890s, after having been here for 500 years. And now we even tell them that what is on the ground, they can buy it, they can have it for a song. So that is the problem that we have as at today. After the 5-year development plan, Nkrumah had a consolidated plan and later on had a 7-year development plan. What were the main characteristics of his economic policy? The main characteristic of Nkrumah's economic policy was economic planning, a systematic planning of how we're going to create jobs, how we're going to be self-reliant, how we're going to develop our infrastructure, how we're going to bring water, electricity, health to our people. And that ought to be in a planned environment. That ought to be on the plans of the state being the driver of economic investment. That ought to be on the plank of the state and private enterprise, of the cooperatives, and of the state and foreign enterprise. And if you look at the history of the First Republic, they were all present. Was there foreign investment? The greatest foreign investment which have happened so far in our country is the Akosombo Dam and Valco. And although we paid half of the money for Akosombo and borrowed the other half, which we paid back within 8 years of Akosombo coming on stream in 1966, January. Again, Valco, which was built, was American investment. We also invested in other industries. Over 300 industries were created in all spheres. When you talk of social housing, Sulpon Ceramics was created so that WCs and other Chinaware and etc. could be produced, and the electronic industry developed in our country. For the automobile industry, the rubber plantations in the Western region were planted with a tie factory to produce all sorts of ties and rubber products for the burgeoning industries which were having. And the interesting thing about Nkrumah's economic plan was going to build the meat factory in Bolgatanga, Zwaregu in Bolgatanga. At that time, Akosombo electricity had not reached that area. But he went and built there, put generators there, because it was near one of the factors of production, that is nearness to raw materials, cattle. When the factory was built, the hide of the cattle was brought to Abeyime, which also was a savanna area where they reared cattle, but which had an indigenous tannery industry. And he put a factory there to cure the hide of the cows, of the slaughtered cattle. And from there, he took the cured hide to Kumasi to produce shoes, the famous Achimota sandals, because he wanted all of our people to wear sandals in our country and not to walk barefooted. So straight away, he has reunited our country by linking economically 3 different parts of our country. The Northern Territory, that's in the Upper East region, the Transvolta Togoland, that's at Abeyime, and Asante, that is in Kumasi. He didn't only locate industries to the Accra or to Tema enclave. He also created industrial enclaves in the Western region, industrial enclaves in Ashanti, and was planning to create industrial estates elsewhere. In Tamale, he put up a ginnery so that when cotton was cultivated in Tamale, the value chain will be created right up to the market. The ginnery separated the cotton. These bales of cotton was hauled, transported to Japan for the yarn factory. That's the base of the textiles to be made there. And after it has been made, it's sent to Akosombo Textiles or Tema Textiles or GTMC or Freedom Textiles to be turned into all types of textiles. It didn't finish there. GNTC, Ghana National Trading Corporation, was created. A textile wholesale was created to take on these textile products and break bulk for retailers in the markets for the women to sell. And he added a human resource component by establishing the Department of Textiles in KNUST, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, to produce textile designers, to produce engineers, etc., who are going to run these factories. So it was a total economy, the development of the total economy, a self-reliant economy. Things that we needed, we produced them for ourselves. It was import substitution. He didn't only limit himself to great economists like J.H. Mensah, Ayekumi, and others from Ghana. The great Atta Lewis, a Nobel Economist Prize winner, was part of his economic team. And there were economists from elsewhere, from Eastern Europe and elsewhere, and other countries from the Americas, all to come and help him put together the 7-year development plan. And the 7-year development plan was all-encompassing. Some people say that, oh, because Nkrumah was socialist, he was only concerned about state corporations. Nkrumah hardly nationalized anything. He rather started everything. The insurance, the state, publishing, and etc. Why state publishing? Because they needed to supply books, exercise books as well, to the education policy that he was pursuing. It is not like today we have free SHS and we have to import exercise books from Malaysia. We're doing it in Ghana here. And we were able to do it in Ghana here. The Subri plantation was planted with paper trees, which you could use to make turn into paper, so that it will feed the Ghana Publishing Corporation. There were fantastic authors who came out, Ghanaian authors, Efwa Sutherland and others who wrote books for us, Diana, Michael, and others, Kaifa Mensah, great poets, J.H. Nketia, the musicologist. All these people came up during those times. And Nkrumah brought up a cultural revolution spearheaded by what we call the African personality, to restore confidence in ourselves, for us to go back to learn the glorious aspect of our history, that Africans have not always been slaves as it was pervaded, that it had not always been wars and underdevelopment, it had not always been poverty, it had not always been backwardness, but that we have had a historical past, a glorious empires like ancient Ghana, Mali, Songhai. It was in Mali that a king of Mali, Mansa Musa, took so much gold to go and give out on his trip, religious trip to Saudi Arabia, that the gold prices fell in Egypt and elsewhere. There was great Zimbabwe. Those were empires. We've had empires like Kush and Aksum in Ethiopia. Did we know about it? There had been a disconnect in the knowledge transfer, and we had been told by our colonizers that we were nothing, and that we were savages, and that before the white man came, we lived on trees. But before the white man came, there were kingdoms down here. People traveled, people migrated, people built, people created political systems, they created social systems, in which norms and customs and laws in which they lived by. Even the system of slavery which was here was not chattel slavery. It was not commodity slavery. The human being was not reduced to that of a commodity who could be bought and sold on the market like cattle, and which was introduced to us by the economic system which the Europeans brought. So when we talk of the rule of Kwame Nkrumah, we are not simply talking about the fact that he became president of the Republic of Ghana in 1960, or he became the prime minister in 1952, or he became the leader of government business in Ghana. We're talking of the fact that this is somebody who symbolized our freedom and our justice. This is somebody who symbolized the pride we ought to have in ourselves, the confidence that we also are a people. We are people with a history, and we should know our history and be proud of it. And it should inspire us. The history of ancient Greece, the history of ancient Rome inspired a backward Europe after 300 or 400 years of the dark ages of savagery, of massacres in Europe, to have the Renaissance in the 15th, 16th century in Europe, for them to come out of the dark ages. When are we going to have our Renaissance? When are we going to take back our confidence and know that we can do it, and we must do it, and we need to do it? Some people might think that, oh, history is a bore, but the truth of the matter is that we still use the Archimedes principle. The Archimedes principle was invented by Archimedes way back over 1,000 years ago, or more than that. But we need it. The history of motion by Newton, it's in the past. If you don't go and learn the history, you'll be able to learn the principle. The principle doesn't just drop from heaven into your head. You need to learn it. You need to learn the circumstances under which he postulated or formulated that theory and how it was implemented. You need to learn about how the Industrial Revolution, for example, started in Great Britain. If you don't, there will be a vacuum, there will be a gap, a disconnect in development for you. So we need to learn ours. How was architecture like? How was it that when winds blew, the roofing, the architectural roofing of a typical house, a traditional house, didn't get blown off? How did they do it? How were they mining gold to sell gold to get the accolade of the Gold Coast? The Gold Coast was gotten about 300-400 years ago before modern mining of gold. And they couldn't just have been picking the gold on the ground. They were mining gold. Do we learn it? Do we learn the economic history of Asante? Our own economic history, political history, our education, history of education, how schools started in the palaces, etc., etc. Nkrumah brought about all these things. He set up the Institute of African Studies in order for us to be able to know our history, our correct history, to discard the miswritten history which has been pervaded to us. He brought economic development to our country. He created a human resource reservoir, which didn't only work in Ghana, but also traveled to other African countries and elsewhere to go and work and bring in remittances. Yes, they went to the diaspora to work. They went elsewhere to work. We are giving them the educational scholarship, but they brought in funds to help their families and to help the country. So they are all important. And he also built a united country. Unfortunately, there were a lot of resistance. And one of the resistance, I told you, was the vigilante groups. And indeed, in 1958, Kwame Nkrumah passed the Avoidance of Discrimination Act, which legislated or banned all sectarian, religious, or tribal-based parties. And so the opposition came together to form the United Party. But they continued on a violent streak against the state, bombing young pioneer movement, that's children at the Accra Sports Stadium, attempting to assassinate the president in Kulungugu and in the Flagstaff House, and causing general mayhem. Some of them were caught, like Obeche Vilante, gun running with lots of arms and ammunition he had smuggled from Lome. And he was convicted by Justice Akuffo-Henaku in the appeals courts and sentenced to prison, where unfortunately he died. J.B. Dankwa was caught aiding and abetting an assassin of Nkrumah, who in 1965 tried to shoot him at Flagstaff House. And he had a copy of a letter, of a speech he was going to read at the broadcasting in order to take over the country. He unfortunately also died within a month or two after he was imprisoned. This mayhem which was brought, this violence, led to security laws being passed. And the security law which was passed was called the PD, the Preventive Detention Act. Nkrumah also passed, through a referendum, passed law to legislate the other opposition parties as illegal for the CPP to be the only party. That's the one-party state, which was actually in fashion all over. In Nkrumah's foreign policy, I've already told you of the non-aligned movement. In 1958, April, he convened a conference of 8 independent African countries. And earlier on, April 15th was African Freedoms Day. Although now African Freedoms Day, which is became African Liberation Day, and African Day is now May 25th. It started on April 15th on the eve of the conference of the 8 independent African states. Again in December of 1958, the All People's Africa Conference was convened. And you had people like Nelson Mandela, Mbeki, Sobukwe, and other liberation, Kaunda, Obote, all of them convening in Accra. Saminyoma, elsewhere, convening in Accra. The Bureau of African Affairs was set up, and it helped all these African liberation fighters. The school I went to, on my left was a Namibian, and on my right was a South African. That is how Nkrumah created our educational system to give a place to the refugees from the other colonies. 1963, when the South African Union was set up, and that was a compromise. He wanted a united African states with a united security system, so that all these little wars and etc. and violence could be quelled by the security system, the African army. He wanted a common currency, like the Europeans have a common currency. Indeed, we can say that the EU, the European Union, which just started as a coal and steel treaty in 1954 or so, studied the blueprint of the African unity Kwame Nkrumah pushed. And now they have done it. And they are using that weight, that unity of their industry, unity of capital, unity of labor, to dominate the world, to compete against the United States and against Russia, which are multinational national entities like the European Union. And we are still balkanized, 54 countries, little countries, unable to negotiate or do anything. Again, like I said, Nkrumah's detractors were on him. International reaction was also very great. Despite the successes he chalked, the model of development, the development banks, which invested in agriculture development bank, in industry, capital investment board, in housing, bank for housing and construction, etc., etc. Despite all these things, in 1966, he was overthrown by local reactionary plus international reaction that's led by the CIA and the MI6. And since then, Ghana, our beloved country, has been in doldrums. We never found our feet in order to move forward. I will, of course, he was made co-president of the Republic of Guinea. He wrote books whilst he was in exile, and the Osajefo passed on to eternity on April 27, 1972. He was buried first in Guinea. Later on, he was exhumed and reinterred in Ghana, and he's presently entombed at the Kwame Nkrumah Mausoleum in central Accra. That is the place where he declared independence of Ghana. Thank you very much. I'd like to hear from you, your contributions. I'd like to be engaged with you, any discussions and any questions you may ask. Thank you very much. Amandla. Amandla.
Thank you, Common Justice, for the presentation. I think we left a comment in the chat room for comrades who have questions to either raise their hands or leave it in the chat. We have a few more minutes with Common Justice, who have been gracious to give us the time to discuss with us about the legacy of Kwame Nkrumah. I think you can. Yeah, you can hear me. If you can hear me and you have a question, you can either raise your hand or leave your question here and we'll read it back to Common Justice. And while we wait for questions to come in, one question we can share with you, Common Justice, is for someone who is in, let's say, in Mozambique right now. They've been facing turmoil with the so-called terrorist attack, and we are speaking right now around Kwame Nkrumah. Why should somebody in Mozambique, in the challenges that they're facing today, look into Nkrumah as an example of how they can liberate themselves, or care around what Nkrumah has done while he was with us here on Earth?
Well, like I indicated, Kwame Nkrumah symbolized national unity. And so everything that he did was aimed at bringing people together. People might even be surprised that after he declared a one-party state, he welcomed opposition, some opposition members like Mahmoud Bawumia, who was the founder of the Northern People's Party, to be a cabinet minister in his government. And everything he did it legally and constitutionally. The courts, the high courts, were packed with some of his political opponents of the 1950s. Justice Akuffo-Henaku was the justice of the appeal courts, etc., unless he was challenged. So I believe that Mozambique, after the trauma of the liberation struggle, after 500 years of brutal colonization by the Portuguese, should understand that it's only through national unity and a united Mozambique that they can move forward. And they can't be cutting people's hands. If you cut somebody's hands, how is the person going to work? How is the person going to contribute to the national wealth? And Mozambique is one entity. It has a shared history. So upon that basis, there should be unity. And I think it's a bourgeois democracy. The elections are held there. Different parties are allowed there. And so there's really no cause for it, unless, of course, incorrigible reactionaries who lost out because of the independence that are still bankrolling this kind of banditry which is going on in Mozambique.
Okay. Thank you, Comrade. Comrade Seriam Fiake, I hope I didn't butcher your name. Please ask your question.
All right. I want to say thanks to the professor for the vivid history lecture. I want to ask, does Kwame Nkrumah have a succession plan? And did he groom somebody to take over him while he's away? Or why doesn't he have a vice president? Thank you.
Yeah, Kwame Nkrumah had a presidential commission anytime he traveled out. And the presidential commission was chaired by Nana Akuffo-Henaku, a chief. they took over anytime he left out. The Constitution of 1960 was not did not give provision for a vice president. It rather gave provision for a presidential commission anytime President Nkrumah was out. And a whole lot of his people were trained to be able to take over. I mean, take it or leave it. In 1979, without Kwame Nkrumah, within 3 months, the People's National Party, a successor of the CPP, despite the fact that the CPP had been banned, the members had been incarcerated by the NLC and the Buzia regime and others, they were able to resurrect and win an election within 3 months. You know.
And please feel free to ask the question. So while we wait for all the questions to come, let's talk about, you did touch on it during the presentation. What is causing the erasure, the distortion of Kwame Nkrumah's legacy? For a while, right, Kwame Nkrumah's Day, Founders Day, has been celebrated. And through different regimes, they are trying to rewrite history. What is it? Why are they doing that? And what is it they're afraid of when it comes to Kwame Nkrumah?
Well, the distortion in the political history of our country is part of the distortion and miswritten nature of African history. A lot of progressive aspects of African history is always hidden. I mean, at a certain time, we're even told that Egypt was white, when we know that Egypt, the pyramids were built by blacks. I mean, the Sphinx is created in the image of a black person. Napoleon goes there and tries to blow off the nose because he can't accept that people who have been subjugated could have had a glorious past. And so the distortion in the political history of our country, which Kwame Nkrumah is a central part, also had to go in line with that by those who were against him, not against him personally only, but against what he stood for, against a progressive African and liberated African state, who was an example. You see, the truth of the matter is that Kwame Nkrumah is larger than Ghana, is larger than Africa, because he stood for those eternal values of freedom, of justice, of liberation, of control of one's own destiny. Those were the values the great man stood for. And that's why he, despite attempts at distorting the history, miswriting it to suit other things, still he stands tall out of it.
We have a question from the Winneba Collective, from Comrade Nanaudom Poku. The question is, I read from some book that the British left us some money when they were overthrown from power. How true is this?
Well, that's a big lie, and copious articles have been written on it. I indeed referred to it when I was speaking about the 5-year development plan. And when Nkrumah came to power in the internal self-government of 1951, he started the first budget for our country. Hitherto, there was very little taxes on the gold companies, etc. There was higher taxes on shipping for our cocoa during the Second World War because of competition for space with armaments and ammunitions which were being shipped towards the war areas. But Nkrumah started with a fiscal policy which brought about savings. He put a tax on cocoa. And cocoa, mind you, the investment for cocoa was done by the Africans. Cocoa was brought in here by Tetekwashi. The Gans and the Kwiapims started the cocoa investments, especially in Achim, Suhum, Kofi Pari areas there, went into Ashanti. The Ashantis took it up, they put in their land, they put in their sweat equity, etc., and started exporting cocoa. And the European companies like Cadbury and Fry, UAC, GB Olivan were taking advantage of it. They were the cocoa brokers, what we call the cocoa crushing. They would buy the cocoa at very low prices. Indeed, in 1939, the cocoa farmers burnt their cocoa rather than sell it. And so around 1947, the Cocoa Marketing Board was set up. In 1951, 52, Kwame Nkrumah took over the Cocoa Marketing Board and then put up a common tax on it. And the monies which came out of it, he invested in both infrastructure and in savings. And he was able to save $500 million from our own sweat and our work and from our cocoa. It was our own money. He only saved that money in British securities in London. Of course, it was used by the British to protect their pound sterling. But after independence, we said we needed our money back because part of that money was what was used to build Akosombo Dam. Part of that money was used to finance those 300 or so factories which were built. But even Tema, Okonfa-Notche, Adome Bridge, Tefle Bridge, elsewhere, it was our monies during those times in the 50s that was used to finance it. The British contributed in those 5-year development plan while they were still taking our things away, only £1.5 million pounds sterling. But the whole project cost about £65 million, and we contributed it through the physical planning of Osagyefo and the CPP government. So it is not true that the British left us money. They didn't. Indeed, when Kwame Nkrumah went to the Governor General's office to take over, he had taken everything away. And if you like, go to England, go to the Imperial War, the Imperial Museum, you see the governor's office recreated with the furniture and everything of the Gold Coast there. They took it away. They couldn't even get the pencil there. So they didn't leave us anything.
There is another question from Dan.
Hey, sorry, they left us two things: the beer factory as Accra Brewery and the biscuit factory in Jamestown. Apart from these two, nothing else was left.
So before we go back to the Wilma Collective, I have not a question. I did see one comrade. It looks like they've. Okay. So Comrade Lukman Youssef, you have a question, and then after that we'll go back to the Wilma Collective for the second question. Go ahead, Comrade.
Good evening, everyone. For this thing, there is still an opportunity for us to have United States of Africa, as was envisioned by
Comrade Lukman, well, you have connection issues at the moment. Can you try to ask your question again? And if we're not able to hear, can you write it? Can you try one more time?
Is it better now?
Yes.
Hello.
Go ahead, give it a shot.
Yes. So I'm saying that I'm first of all thanking Prof for the wonderful presentation. My question is, does he think that there is still an opportunity for us to have a United States of Africa, as was envisioned by the Osagyefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah?
Yes, I really do share in that aspiration. And I think all of us who believe in Pan-Africanism should work hard towards it. Look at our borders. Those who live along the border are viewed with suspicion as being foreigners. We have a whole lot of problems, the problems of trade. Why are we having the Continental Free Trade Center in the headquarters in Accra? To improve trade. The only way you can improve trade is to knock out physical barriers, like Kwame Nkrumah was trying to do with Burkina Faso, then Upper Volta, when he faced an assassination attempt later at Kulungugu. You know, the British, the Europeans They've taken away fiscal borders. When you want to travel, you are from the European Union. You can travel anywhere you want, go and work anywhere you want, stay anywhere you want. Then nobody is going to question you because you're a national of the European Union. Why can't we do that in Africa? Why are Nigerians viewed as aliens in Ghana? Why are Ghanaians viewed as aliens in Zambia? We're all Africans. So it inures to the benefit of the people. It doesn't inure to the benefit of the elite alone. There's free movement of capital, it means investments. There's free movement of labor. So where there's shortage of labor, labor can move from a place where there's surplus to that place to go and work and create wealth, develop the area. But I'm not giving up. I'm an optimist. I'm an optimist because I'm a student of history. And I know that for EU to come, that's the European Union, it has been over 100 years of pan-European Union activities. It was way back in the 1816s, after the Vienna Congress, that people were trying very hard to bring Europe together. They fought and massacred themselves. They had 2 world wars, destroyed themselves before they had sense in order to come together to form the European Union. We have seen our fair share of tragedies. So why doesn't it push us to unite? And we should all fight for that unity, which is the panacea to our problems.
Okay. Be mindful of the time because we are now at the top of the hour. I think we'll take 2 more questions. I will share the 1 question from the Winneba Collective and 1 more question from the audience. The question that I see, someone has used. Some books keeps moving. Some books says the Big Six fought for our independence. Please, was it only Nkrumah who fought for our independence, or it was the whole of the Big Six? And it will be also good to give the context of who the Big Six are for the people who are not from Ghana.
Well, the Big Six had the 6 leading members of the United Gold Coast Convention, which I said was created on 4th of August 1947 and demanded self-government in the shortest possible time. I also told you that Nkrumah came in December of 1947 and brought a new type of organization to the United Gold Coast Convention, radicalized it, and brought the people, the ordinary people, the youth, the women, into the center of the organization. That was resisted by some of those who founded the United Gold Coast Convention. And those leading members of the United Gold Coast Convention, who later on became the Big Six, included Dr. J.B. Dankwa, Justice Akuffo-Henaku, William Oforiatta, Obechebi Lante, and Akwaje. Akwaje was the one who suggested the invitation of Nkrumah because Nkrumah had been his junior at Lincoln University in the United States of America. The Big Six was coined by the people. And why were they coined by why was it coined by the people? Because after the traders had boycotted European goods, which had culminated in the ex-servicemen's march to present a petition, and which ended in the bloody shooting in cold blood by the British, Imre and his people, at the Christian crossroads. They were arrested, these 6 individuals who led the United Gold Coast Convention, and sent to various prisons. So the name was coined the Big Six for their role in the independence struggle in that period of 1948. I indicated that the 5 said that it was the fault of Kwame Nkrumah. He was a communist. He had brought radicalization to the party, and he had organized what they later on condescendingly, I might say, called the veranda boys, and float them and jets them. He had brought them into the center of organization, and that they were professional people who had their businesses, and because they didn't have time, that's why they had employed Kwame Nkrumah to come and work for them. So Kwame Nkrumah was an employee, so he could be dispensed with. Later on, they tried to do that. Kwame Nkrumah accepted it in front of the Kusi Commission, and you can refer to the proceedings of the Kusi Commission. And he took the whole blame, and he became a hero to the people. And history is made by the people. History is written by the people. Again, whilst Kwame Nkrumah was fighting for national unity of the 4 component parts of the Gold Coast to become Ghana, there were others who, because they lost elections, indicated that once they had lost national elections, they must have a piece of their tribal area to be independent. J.B. Dankwa wanted independence of Achim and Ashanti. Obeche Bilamti wanted independence of Accra. The Northern Territories people, Mamu Baumia, wanted independence of the Northern Territories. Buzia wanted independence of Ashanti and Ahafo, or Brown Ahafo. That time there was no Brown Ahafo, of Western Ashanti. Said that they would trade, they would pass their goods through La Côte d'Ivoire to the sea. They didn't need to pass through the sea to Takoradi or to Tema. Worst of all, this was even the heartbreaking thing. Dr. J.B. Dankwa, after they had lost the 1956 elections, they wrote a letter, which is also available, sent it via Dr. Busia to the British, telling them that, pleading with the British not to leave, and that the British had not finished their experiment on the Gold Coast, and that they were needed here to continue. How can such people be founders? If you can prove that looking for disunity, looking for the breaking into different parts, can amount to founding the whole, then I'll buy your logic. But it is not logical. You can't want independence for a small part and then be said to have been the founder of the larger parts. No. Their role in the struggle is there for all of us to know. But their roles are both positive and negative, and both must be said. Both must be interrogated honestly and openly without any hiding or anything, for us to know the roles of the various people. Nkrumah, being the founder of Ghana, is not the person Nkrumah. It was the people he represents, and he represents the ordinary people. He represents the working people. He represents the women. He represents the youth, those who were derogatory called veranda boys, who were seen as nothing. These were the people who, through whose demonstration, through whose labor, through whose unflinching support at the ballot box, enabled Kwame Nkrumah to lead us to independence. And that's why we say he's the founder of modern Ghana.
The question from Nima is, she wants to find out what is the motive of the current government for the change of Founders Day?
Well, the motive of the current government for that is that they are giving an alternative narrative of their history. Like I've indicated, they feel that they were the natural rulers, or the antecedents felt and said it copiously, that they were the natural rulers of our country. And so the British should have dealt with them and dealt with them alone. The people did not trust them. So the people did not give them the mantle of leadership to lead us in the liberation struggle. The people found their own, which was in Kwame Nkrumah, and gave him that mandate. And he was able to prosecute the struggle successfully. So in order to turn the tables, they have to give a different narrative of the history and co-equate. Nobody is saying that the United Gold Coast Convention was not founded. It was. Nobody is saying that the role of Dankwa in there was not significant. It was. Was the role of Dankwa significant in the unity of our country? Was it significant in the acquisition of independence by modern Ghana and the creation of the state? No. I postulate that no, it was not. And so that is the narrative they want to change. But like I said, history is made by the people. History is in the collective memory of the people. And so the truth always comes. We were told that Herodotus did almost everything in ancient Greece. We now know that Herodotus stole most of the things from ancient Egypt. We now know about great mathematicians who were able to calculate for the construction of the pyramid. Or at a certain time when I was growing up, they said some people from somewhere from planet X came to fix the pyramid there. The truth will always come out because the truth is in the bosom of the people.
Comrade Flo Mwashimba would like to ask a question live. Feel free to go and unmute the mic.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Can you hear me well?
Yes, you can go ahead with your question.
I am very happy to hear a lot of the things that you're saying. I'm a much younger person than you, and I really share a lot of the ideals and a lot of the stuff that you're saying. But one thing that is frustrating me as a young person is that, especially having been raised by communities where, you know, there was colonization and there was a transition from colonization to what some people would consider free Africa. And as a younger person who has seen more of what would have been free Africa, I admire a lot of the people who are there before me and what they tried to do so that I can enjoy some of the freedoms I have now. But one thing that frustrates me every day is that there's still a slave mentality that goes on even within people my age. How do you deal, or how do you play a role in terms of trying to make a change and keeping some of the, you know, the fights and freedoms, some of the fights and, you know, a lot of the, I don't know the word to use, but, you know, like you're still fighting and still talking about this point. And I think this is going to be something that will be, you know, would have to fight for so many generations before it can be eradicated in our brains. For those of us who are still here and we are still alive and we're trying to do something about it, how do you reconcile what was being done in the past by people like Kwame Nkrumah and many other people who come after him? And as an individual, what can you do? You know, what is your role as an individual? What can you do? Because it's not easy to change people's minds. I think as Africa, that's our biggest challenge. People have different thoughts, different ways of thinking. We've been brainwashed. So many of us have been brainwashed. We just follow a lot of what was handed down to us from generation to generation. And I don't know how we can be able to reconcile staying true to the African tradition, as well as a lot of what is out there in the world and how the world is moving. How do you reconcile, and what is the role that you can play?
Well, thank you very much for your contribution and your question. I believe that you must always keep hope alive. You must have confidence in yourself as a human being, and must have confidence in your people as having contributed to the human development and the human history. You just don't accept hook, line, and sinker what you are told about yourself. What do you know about yourself? Do you know yourself? Do you know the history of your people? Do other Africans know about us? Growing up, yes, We read a lot of African writers and gave us an insight into the cultures of, for example, Chinua Achebe's books, of the Igbos. Zambia Shall Be Free by Kawunda, read about Shaka the Zulu and others, that it didn't create a certain darkness in your mind that, oh, these people, because we don't know them, they are savages, or they are this, or they are this, or they are that. You get to know, seek the knowledge, the knowledge about your people. That was what is going to set us free. And let's talk honestly about it. We are modernizing. Let's talk about our failings. Let's recognize our failings. Let's talk about our successes. And let's fight to keep our successes and work hard on it. We are not all negative. It's not possible. The world is negative and positive. And indeed, the law of the unity of opposites is that what brings about the light. Is the positive and the negative charges together to bring something, the synthesis, the good thing for us. So we never give up. We must understand that there's a miswritten history of Africa. We got to keep on digging and finding out and bringing it out and unashamedly talking about it. I mean, being hip, being modern, being tech savvy doesn't mean that you don't talk about yourself or your people or their stories and everything. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I was having a conversation with a friend, and we're wondering, was Aladdin a white man? Was he a Caucasian with blue eyes? Why has Aladdin suddenly transformed from an Arab or a black-skinned person into a white person? The stories of the Arabian Nights, why has it become Eurocentric? Because they see value in those stories, and so they want to push it in order to project themselves. Do we do that to ourselves? Whether it's in fashion, whether it's in music, whether it's in food, whether it's our way of living, etc., etc. So going back to the African personality, which Nkrumah postulated, is one way out for us. We need to have the counterculture against the decadent culture which is being pervaded to us.
Kwame Dinah has a question for us. We will be coming to you in February soon, Kwame Dinah. I think it's this Saturday, Kwame. So her question is, what controversies did Kwame Nkrumah's government face, and how can it be likened to our current situations in Ghana? What controversies Kwame Nkrumah's government faced?
Well, he faced a lot of controversies. His foreign policy of reaching out to all faced controversy because it was opposed by the Western powers. His fight to ensure that we have control over our natural resources was resented. Indeed, at a certain time, all the gold mining companies left our country and said gold had finished in Ghana. Although now we are the largest exporter of gold in Africa, ahead of South Africa. They told us that gold had, so he had to create a state gold mining corporation to continue gold mining in our country. They let the price of cocoa fall to its lowest, although we produce over 550,000 tons in 1965. So that the funds for our 7-year development plan was shrunk considerably. And of course, internally too, there was the mentality which our dear lady was talking about, the mentality that if you don't get sardines or corned beef, then there's a shortage of food. Meanwhile, 90% of Ghanaians were eating their fufu, were eating their plantain and contomere stew and etc. But the small middle class, because there were shortages of foreign exchange to import food for them, the food politics, that same food politics we see play out in Venezuela and other places, was also playing out here. And of course, within the political space, I was saying that Nkrumah was winning election after election. And so the opposition thought that they could only use violence to try to dislodge him. And in using the violence, they were clamped down. And so the political space for the other bourgeois and reactionary parties shrank for them. They were banned. because they financed attempted coup d'etats, 1958. Just imagine, a year after independence, one of the leading opposition members, Aram Konsam, was engaged in an attempted coup d'etat. You know, and so Nkrumah faced both international reaction. They didn't see why he should go and help a brother African country like Congo to help Lumumba to gain freedom for the Congo or other countries. So they supported him, and they got their local conservative reactionaries who thought that they should have the power and not Nkrumah to collaborate with. And those were some of the controversies he had.
So we have about 8 minutes left. There is a comment that I'm going to read from Comrade Osman Dogolinson. He says, we have tried several times to have a common currency called the ECHO. It took several years, but still can be actualized due to a number of setbacks of member states. One could attribute one reason to be as a result of different colonial masters who still have some influence in our decision making. How could Nkrumah reconcile this, the contradiction?
Well, yes, the contradiction had to be overcome. That's why he proposed a common currency. What's the common currency for the French West African countries? Do they control that currency? They have to pay a certain amount of their reserves, lodge a certain amount of their reserves, and pay a certain amount on it to France. That's what keeps France going. So France certainly is going to subvert any talk of a foreign currency which goes outside its control. The British were not so lucky. I mean, Nkrumah quickly moved from the British pound to the Ghanaian pound and later on to the Ghanaian cedi. How can we achieve it? Two countries can come together and start with a common currency. We did not set up very high fiscal and financial criteria for it, because we need a common currency in order to be able to build a stable economy. And a common currency must not go alone on its own. It must go along with a package of economic measures, which is based upon a self-reliant economy. We can produce rice. Why do we have to import rice? Why do we have to import chicken? Why do we have to import cement when we have clinker here and we have the cement factory here? Liberia produces a lot of iron ore. We have steel factories here. Why do we have to bring in steel products? So we need to keep our monies. Then Ghana, we have a lot of gold. We produce a lot of gold. How much do we save as a reserve for our currency? When you go to Fort Knox in America, or you go to England, they have huge reserves of gold bullions. Do they produce gold? They don't produce gold in England, certainly not. But they use it as a hedge to back their currency. Here, we mine the gold. Can't we mandate that every gold mine, a certain percentage must be sent to the central bank in order to be used as a reserve for a gold reserve for our currency? Can't Ghana and Liberia, or Ghana and Sierra Leone, or Ghana and Nigeria form a currency union and see others join it? I mean, the OAU, they didn't wait for all the African countries to join on the first day. Some took the lead and others have joined. The EU, their currency, their common currency, the euro, not every European, the British are certainly not part of it. Some started, Germany, France, and others started before others joined it. So why do we have to wait for everybody to agree before we start it? Let's start it, and I'm sure others will join it.
I feel one of the questions has already been responded to, and I think we should bring it to a close. In terms of closing arguments, I hope that you can share with us in 2020, if Kwame Nkrumah, as we always say here at SFG, Nkrumah never dies. Since Nkrumah is living with us today, what will he be doing different in Ghana today? And anything you would like to add for your closing remarks?
Well, there are certain internal values Nkrumah will still stand for. He will stand for eradication of poverty. He will stand for provision of water, electricity to everybody. He will stand for freedom. He will stand for justice. He will stand for liberation. But this will be done taking cognizance of the fact that we are in 2020. When Nkrumah came to Ghana in 1947, he didn't bring 1937 values or 1927 values. He brought the values of his time in the fight against colonialism. And so here, he will be fighting for national unity. He will be fighting for continental unity. He will be fighting for a more integrated economic unity, a self-reliant economy, for us to eat the rice we produce, for us to eat drink the milk that we produce, wear the clothes that we produce, and be confident as a people because we've got a rich history.
Thank you, Comrade Justice.
Thank you.
It was very instructive. Thank you to all the collectives who joined the call. We apologize for the technical difficulties. It's a motivation for us to know that what we are doing, the work that we are doing is not in vain, and we'll continue to build with all the collectives. And we have comrades also connecting from London, from the DRC diaspora. Thank you, Comrade Marie-Claire, for joining us. We have South Africa as well, and we have everyone, and even those that we don't want them to watch us, but they are watching us, as we all know. We look forward to doing a second part to this, and we'll continue to engage you all in our lectures. Thank you for now, and as we say, Nkrumah Showboy, Amandla, away. Thank you, comrade.